Okay, so here's a huge question. How does a person, a revered prophet, eventually become worshipped as God himself? Well, the source we're digging into today has a really fascinating and, honestly, a pretty provocative theory about it. It suggests the deification of Jesus wasn't some single overnight event, but actually the result of a long competitive process. So yeah, let's unpack that.
The entire theory we're about to explore really hinges on one single, pretty powerful idea. An idea that, if you buy into it, kind of reframes the whole history of early Christianity. And here it is. The claim is this: the history of early Christianity is the history of virtue signaling. Whoa. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're picturing social media debates, right? But hold on. The source here is using this term in a very specific, very historical way to explain how Jesus went from being seen as a prophet to being seen as God.
So, what on earth does virtue signaling actually mean in this ancient context? Let's take a look at the mechanics of how this supposedly worked. You see, at the absolute heart of this theory is this idea of a competitive cycle, like an engine that was constantly driving theological change. The source gives it a name: the divinity escalation. So, let's be really clear about what this theory means by virtue signaling. We're not talking about individuals just trying to show off how moral they are. Nope. It's describing a competitive dynamic between rival groups in early Christianity. The idea is, to get a leg up and assert your authority, your group would present a version of Jesus that was more divine than the other guys. It was a way to claim you had the superior truth and, push your rivals to the margins.
And according to this perspective, this wasn't just a one-and-done thing. It was a cycle that just kept repeating, a self-perpetuating loop where the stakes just got higher and higher each time.
And the process, as this theory lays it out, was actually a pretty simple three-step loop. First, you create a new, updated, more divine version of Jesus. Step 2, you promote it like crazy, championing it as the one superior truth. And finally, Step 3, you diminish all the other versions out there, calling them incomplete or maybe even heretical. And then the cycle would just start all over again with another group.
So you might be wondering, where does all this theological one-upmanship lead? Well, according to the source, it ends in one of the most significant transformations in all of religious history, the journey that took Jesus from prophet to God.
This divinity escalation wasn't random at all. This viewpoint shows it as a really consistent, upward trend. Think of it like a theological arms race that, over generations, just kept elevating Jesus' status, bit by bit.
And you can see a really clear shift because of this process. The theory argues that these earlier views of Jesus, as a great prophet or the Messiah, they were slowly but surely overshadowed by these increasingly divine concepts. First, he becomes the unique Son of God, and then, ultimately, he's seen as God the Son himself.
You can literally map out this theological path. According to this theory, it starts with Jesus as a human prophet. Then, it escalates to Messiah. The next huge leap is to him being the unique Son of God. And the whole cycle finally culminates at the endpoint, Jesus as God the Son, completely equal to God the Father.
And the source really sums up its entire argument with this one stark conclusion. And finally, he became equal to the Father. So that's the story of Christianity. In this view, that final step isn't just the end of a process. It's framed as the central story of the entire faith.
All right, let's put all these pieces together. What we've just walked through is, you have to admit, a pretty provocative theory for how some of our most core religious beliefs can actually be formed.
So, to boil it all down, this perspective is proposing that the central doctrine of Jesus' full divinity wasn't this static, day-one belief. Instead, it was the final product of a very human, very competitive social process, where all these rival groups kept escalating their claims to win followers and lock down their authority.
And that leaves us with a really provocative question that goes way beyond just this one topic. What does it mean if our most sacred core beliefs aren't simply revealed to us, but are actually the result of competition? It's a pretty powerful idea to think about. Thanks for joining me on this one.